Welcome again to our near-death experience interview series. I'm Robert Mays, and Suzanne and I have researched near-death experiences for the past 15 years. We are interviewing people who have had an NDE and who have also received visions of future world events. These interviews are part of our research project that's exploring NDErs' insights into the deeper meaning of the challenges currently facing humanity, such as the pandemic and the social and political polarization of society. What advice do NDErs have for coping with and responding to these challenges? We'll pause here to bring in today's guest.
We are here again today with Rabbi Stephen Robbins of Congregation Neve Shalom in Los Angeles. He is also co-founder of the Academy for Jewish Religion California, the first trans-denominational rabbinic and cantorial school. Stephen is also a clinical psychologist with a specialty in the psychoneuroimmunology of trauma. He has had a total of 7 NDEs in his life. During each NDE, he received a prophetic vision, a message, or a mission. We will continue to explore these experiences in this session. Welcome, Rabbi Robbins.
Thank you. And again, blessings of gratitude and joy about returning to continue unpacking all of my experiences.
Well, thank you for being with us again. Stephen, in our early interviews, we covered your first 5 NDEs. Your first NDE occurred at your birth in 1944. The second NDE was in 1964 from hepatitis. The third was in 1987 from complications from influenza. The fourth was in 1991 from lung collapse. And the fifth NDE was in 2005, also from lung collapse. So can you describe your 6th NDE? When and how did it occur?
The 6th NDE was the most unique and anomalous of all of them because there was no proximate physical cause. I had been to UCLA to see a doctor, and we were on the way home. My driver, Felipe, who was always with me and taking care of me, saw me fall asleep on the way home, which was not unusual. But when we pulled into the driveway of my home, he couldn't wake me up. And when he came around to undo my belt, I just collapsed out of the car into his arms, which was very unusual. This is what he says. And then he felt for my pulse and my breathing, and I neither had a pulse and I wasn't breathing. So he called 911, of course. The ambulance came and they could detect no heartbeat and I wasn't breathing. So they asked him, did I have a history of stroke or some other phenomena? And he said, no, this had never happened before. So again, they took me to the emergency room at Hollywood Presbyterian. And this is the physical side because it's so unusual. When they brought me in, they could detect no heartbeat, maybe a little gurgle now and then, and there was no heartbeat. And by then Felipe was there and he told them about my lung collapses, etc. And so they decided to intubate me to get my lungs working.
Ooh.
And I was warned from the very beginning that I should never be intubated because it would kill me, because my lungs would seize and that would be it. So I was all the way gone. I was at that last step where I could go and never come back. And I experienced the tube going into my mouth and starting to enter my throat, which was very unusual.
Yeah.
Because by the time I was that far, I had no connection with my body whatsoever.
Right.
And according to them, and it's been recorded and videoed, is that my right arm came up and pushed the tube away, which of course was pretty startling for them. And the doctor said later that he figured it was a muscular response.
Right.
So they immediately did it a second time.
Right.
And as they put it in, my arm came up and my hand grabbed the tube and pulled it out. And without my heart beating and my lungs working, everybody in the emergency room heard me say, "Don't do that to me. You'll hurt me. You'll kill me," which of course was pretty startling for all of them. And so they turned to Felipe and said, "What do we do?" And Felipe said, quote, "The rabbi is a very unusual man. And whatever you expect from the normal response of other people, don't expect from him. He has told you not to intubate him." So the doctor said, "What do we do? Just leave him alone?" And Felipe shrugged his shoulders and said, "Well, that seems to be what he wants." So they withdrew. And according to Felipe, I was gone for another half hour, 45 minutes. And according to the medical records, it was about 45 minutes without breath and without heartbeat. And then I came back.
Mm-hmm.
And I opened my eyes and Felipe was holding my hand. And I said, "Hello, Felipe, how are you?" And he said, "I'm fine, how are you?" And I said, "I feel great." And the nurses and the doctors came in and tried and said, "What happened? Or what occurred?" I wasn't on anything medically, no meds that would create this. And I tried to explain to them about near-death experience, but they said, "You had no stroke. You didn't have a heart attack. Your brain was not seized. What caused this?" And I said, on some level, I just became exhausted with being here and struggling with everything. And somehow they came and got me and took me away. And at that, they all kind of freaked out and walked out.
Yes, you needed a rest from physical existence.
And about a half an hour later, I had some coffee and electrolytes, and I got up and went home.
Yes, okay. That must have really astounded them.
It did. They thought I would stay, overnight for observation. And when I stood up and I was dressed and I said, I'm ready to go, they didn't argue with me at all.
Right.
So Felipe brought me home. Felipe couldn't reach Eva. And I said to him, leave her alone. She's in a very important meeting for her. Finally, the meeting was over and she called just after I had returned. And Felipe gave me the phone and said, it's your wife. And Eva said, well, where are you? What's going on? I said, no, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm in the emergency room at Hollywood Presbyterian, but I'm coming home. And that was it.
Sometimes these things are synchronized just right.
Exactly. And I hate to put her through all of the things that happened to me. So I got up and went home. And I never talked about it as an NDE, but I received very powerful messages there about myself and the world and IANDS in particular.
But actually, this would be counted as an NDE.
Yes.
Certainly near death, you were gone. You were dead. And
I was dead. But my body didn't look like I was dead. I wasn't white. My skin was, filled, and they couldn't understand it. When the doctor asked me why I pushed it away, I said, because I don't want anybody to be the cause of my dying. And if you had intubated me, you would have been the cause of my death. And so I pushed it away because I didn't want you to kill me. So he said, you mean you did that for me? I said, I did it as much for you as I did for me. Yeah. I didn't and still don't want anybody to be responsible for my life ending in this world. That was why later when he withdrew and came back, he just shook his head and he said, I don't even know what to say, Rabbi. This is beyond words. And he walked out shaking his head.
Yeah. That's okay. I mean, these kinds of things occur with adepts in certain traditions where it appears that they have really died, and from a medical perspective they have, but actually they still are able to come back.
Well, it's part of the shamanic tradition that I learned from the Navajos and from my work with Wallace Black Elk, who was the medicine chief of the Sioux. And he and I did some sweat lodge and healing together. That's another story. We'll leave that set aside. So in the event, what I experienced was unique even for me. My death and return was called upon by the upper world.
Right.
I was being called to come and to be a vessel and a voice for something that they knew was coming, and that I was to come back and speak to the world about it.
Yet now,
And as you, go ahead.
this was in 2018, right?
Yeah, this is January 17th of 2018. Because I remember I was out for 2 hours or more.
Yeah.
And I was, quote, shown, unquote, the world in the profound chaos that we've described before, with everything dying and falling apart, and humanity basically ignoring it.
Yeah.
And the result of it was that finally humanity, other than the bomb, had found a way to eat the world up. And so the world existence, the soul of the physicality, or what we would call the Shekhinah, the female dimension of God's presence in the physical world, the female, which holds everything together,
yeah,
was being shredded. There is an image from a book called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation or the book of formation, which is very esoteric and very hard to understand, except that for me, at the end, there is an image that the world hangs by a hair of the beard of the Holy One, which means this thread of light, of divine presence, and that every year the earth gets polluted with all of humanity's destructiveness, and that every year on the high holidays, when Jews go into their services, part of what we pray for is the healing of the world.
Yeah.
The idea behind that is not that we are the ones to save the world, but that people need to acknowledge that every one of us is responsible for whether or not the world will continue.
Is this Rosh Hashanah?
This is Rosh Hashanah, the 10 days in between, and then Yom Kippur.
Thank you.
It all comes together. And then there is the holiday of Sukkot, which is about our relationship to the world. And then the holiday of Simchat Torah, the joy of the Torah, in which we finish reading it and immediately start again.
Yeah.
So creation ends and then it begins again. And so this fall cycle of what are called the high holidays is about our needing to heal our relationship with each other, and with God, and then with the world around us, and taking responsibility that is laid upon us in Torah to know that we are responsible for every blade of grass that exists.
Yeah. Can we get into the
like to go back?
Get into the details of what you were shown and what you were told?
Yes. I have 4 primary malachim who delivered the message to me. I think you want to know who they are.
The malachim are your messengers, angels?
Messengers, which are called angels, but they're not, they're messengers.
Yes.
And they are 4 primary malachim, messengers. So remember that the word malach means physical labor. We all do malacha. I have mine, you have yours.
Right.
So on the right is the malach that is called Michael. But in Hebrew, it is Michael. Michael.
Michael.
Yes.
And mi means who. Ka comes from a word kasher, meaning what or who. El, God. Who is God? And on the answer on the right is you are all connected, so you know who God is. It is this connection that never ends. On the left is what in English you would call Gabriel. In Hebrew, it's Gavriel. So if you break it apart, the word Gever means a mighty man, strength. El, the mighty strength of God given to humanity. Wow. And so the two balance each other. And then before us goes Uriel. Uri meaning light, and then El. And it says that Uriel lights our way ahead. Uriel is the guide, and it is the inspiration, revelation that always leads us, if we follow it, to the paths that take us where we're most needed. And behind us comes Raphael, or Raphael in the English terms. The word Rapha means healing. And healing, remember I said, means there's an empty space, and then healing it, bringing the space back together and binding it back in place and filling the emptiness or the disorder with the presence of God. And then above us, Al Roshi, above my head, is the Shekhinah, this loving female dimension who pours love and concern and care upon us. And this comes from the night prayer that we say every night before we go to bed. It's called the evening Shema, which is the most important single prayer. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel, and then the names Yud-He, Vav-He, Elohai, and Yud-He, Vav-He, Echad. It means that these dimensions of God are really all part of one. And it is not about there being one God. It is that the presence of God brings everything together. So this sense of the oneness of everything is what the Shema is about, which means that we are all one of the one. And so frequently, especially in modern humanity, given what the early sociologists called anomie, the anonymity of people, because they're not connected anymore. They don't know who they are, where they belong. And so in the modern world, it becomes so necessary to understand that each of us are one of the great one.
So
and so what happens is these presences said, that you have a great responsibility set upon you. And I said, am I the only one? And they said, no, there are many who will get similar messages in their way. But you are the one who has a unique platform. And I was, of course, unsure of what they meant, because I no longer had a big synagogue. I wasn't a, quote, famous rabbi anymore. Lots of people thought I had really died, other than the development of this rabbinic school. And they said, humanity is at the crossroads by which God challenged Adam. And the question is, will you continue to grow and survive and flourish? Or will you be the agent of the destruction of yourself and the world around you? And so they said, it is time for you to speak out about your transits, your experiences of death and return, and what you've learned, which of course I had never done for all the reasons I told you.
Right.
And they said there is a platform, there is an organization of thousands of people who are connected to millions around the world, who have all experienced what you have in one way or another. But you are the one who has the depth and the voice to articulate it. And you are to go to IANDS and deliver the message that it is this organization that has been studying near-death experience for 40 years.
Correct.
Which is the equivalent of gestation. 40 is the letter of gestation for 40 weeks of gestation. And they said it is time for IANDS to give birth, to release all of its knowledge, not as theology, philosophy, or science, but as the totality of the experience that so many have had of their death and their return and what they've learned from it.
Right.
And they said the most important thing for you to share is that the way humanity will save itself is to relinquish, to give up, to grow beyond the fear of death.
Right. And that is a main message from all NDErs.
Correct. And they said, once you begin to speak out, and IANDS will respond and struggle in its own way to connect people to speak, then you will have served a great part of your mission, and then you will continue to share. And they said, you will, of course, make yourself a target for those who don't like what you're saying, who disagree, who challenge you. And they said, but that is why your soul was sent here, to break, as I said before, to break boundaries, to create a sense of inclusiveness for all people. And so when I came back, how it was, I'm really uncertain. I think, as Eva put it, I discovered IANDS on a website search.
Yeah. Interesting.
You had not.
And then I saw that there was a Los Angeles chapter. And so I called Dennis Purcell.
Correct. He was the group leader at the time.
Yeah, he was the group leader at the time.
Had you not heard of IANDS before this?
No, I hadn't.
So,
And
So in
Wow.
your in this out of body experience that you had, you heard the initials IANDS. You heard
Yes.
IANDS, and that was completely new to you.
Yes. I did not know that there were these millions of people who had this common experience.
Ah,
You were not aware of Raymond Moody or George
No,
Moody or
none of it.
Bruce Grayson or
Ken Rain.
None. No.
Wow.
The only thing I knew was of a book written by a man named Neil Gilman, who was the professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is about as straight and conservative as you can get.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called The Death of Death, in which he traced the development in Judaism from the earliest conceptions of death to where we are now. That, as he said, death is an illusion, not a reality. And that we need to live knowing that we do not die, and so that we are no longer afraid of death. That was the only thing I read before. And
so you did a search on the internet
yes,
for
IANDS.
IANDS,
Yeah.
and you found that there was a local branch chapter in Los Angeles, and you
yes,
talked to Dennis Purcell.
yes. And Dennis and I had a long conversation, of course, and he said, you have to meet with the LA chapter, which I did, which was videoed. And it, of course, it was pretty mind-blowing for most. And then I did a second one, and it again expanded, but I never said in either of those about the message I'd been given. And then Dennis, who was quite ill,
Yes.
turned the leadership over to a man named Tony Camacho.
Yeah.
And Tony asked me to do one, which is videoed. And in that one, I talked about the message I had received for IANDS. And it was very powerful for everybody. Well, what happened is that Tony called Susan Amsden and Chuck Sweetrock and said, you really have to talk to Rabbi Steve Robbins. So I had individual conversations with both, and Chuck invited me to do an invocation of the board meeting several years ago.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to be 10, 15 minutes, which I did. And then the question started, and I was on for over 2 hours. So I delivered the message, and the board was divided between those who wanted to move in that direction and those who wanted to stay with pure research.
Yeah.
And
can I interrupt just to identify to our listeners, our viewers, that Susan Amsden was and still is the business manager in the main office of IANDS here in Durham, North Carolina. And Chuck Sweetrock is on the board of directors and serves in a number of capacities to get the message out about near-death experiences. And so,
thank you.
Our key people, they are still there.
And when I spoke with Chuck, he had just become president of IANDS for the second time. And when they asked him, he said, and you can talk to him about this, he said, I didn't know why they wanted me. I had done my job. And he said, it's because we're at a place at 40 years to not know where to go. And you're the one person who can help us find a path. And when I shared my NDE with him in the message, he got so emotional and he said, this is where I need to now become active as the president. And that's when he invited me to make my presentation to the board.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that we are still struggling with this, you know, but I think that we now, that is Suzanne and I now have the, so to say, permission, spiritually anyway, to move forward with this, since we are working with prophetic visions, and what you had was a prophetic vision, and a very specific mission that needs to be acknowledged and supported to the extent that people choose to support it. But I think that you know, members of IANDS and members of the board will probably support this wholeheartedly. It is a bit unusual for a message from an NDE to come so explicitly and specifically for our organization, I guess for any organization. So this is something that we have to take seriously, and I think that we can, that is Suzanne and I can bring this a little more clearly to the general membership and organization of IANDS.
Well, that just opens my heart with joy, because, you know, I said, look, this organization, you know, the way I put it, it's like a large ship carrying oil or whatever. You know, they're huge, and as they move through the ocean, they set up not just a bow wave, but the feeling 100 miles in front of it that this force is coming, and even the whales move out of the way. Mm. And I said, to turn this around in any way is impossible. And Chuck said, no, it's not. It's time for someone to start it. And he said, so you and I and those who are interested will begin it. And I said, I don't want to be a disruptive force to IANDS. He said, no, just deliver the message. One of the pieces of the board presentation that I rarely talk about, but we'll do it here, is that, and I won't give them their names unless they want to step forward, is a woman who you know and who Chuck knows, said that she had, and I'm hoping I get it right, that she was looking at the large screen for the Zoom because the board meeting, while it was taking place, I wasn't sure whether it was Durham or in Florida.
It was in Florida, I think.
In Florida. Chuck asked me to come to Florida, and of course, I said, I'm not well enough to do it. He said, I'll fly you first class, bring whoever you want, I'll set you up in a hotel. And I said, Chuck, I can't do it. It won't work. And he said, okay, we'll Zoom you in. And I saw all of these faces, not only in the board meeting itself, but the Zoom around the world. And I was both terrified and awed because after, I guess, 58 years of being a rabbi, I know how impossible it is to deal with a board of directors. I've been doing it in many situations.
Yeah.
So I advised Chuck about approaching this slowly and gently and not just pushing it down people's throats.
Yep.
And So what happened with several people, the one who spoke up first said, I was looking at the screen and suddenly I had a vision of a man in a white robe with this shawl over him that was all colored, holding a horn. She didn't know what any of that meant. He had flowing white hair and a white beard. And she said, when you appeared on the screen, she said, the man I saw in my vision was you on the screen. And there were several others who said they had had the same experience. And I knew that something important was happening because my shomrim were all gathered around the board, not just around me, and were not urging, but supporting the board to confront its own choice about what IANDS should do with this incredible repository of knowledge and the experience of all the lives of the people who had turned themselves over to IANDS to make it public to the world, not as a religion, not as a movement, not philosophically or not theologically, but just the lives of the people who had them and what happened to them after they returned. And because, as you know, the transformations in people is profound.
Correct.
And I was shown by my guides the millions of faces of people, both in this world and not, who had near-death moments and returned, and those who had had out-of-body experiences and then returned. And they all said, it's time for someone to speak for us. And so that was part of my task. As you know, I'm not afraid of much of anything. So I just went ahead, but did it only in small increments in my presentation. It was only later when the members of the board who had had NDEs stood up and talked about the vision. The reality of that started my deeper involvement in IANDS, which led me to being here doing this, to Chuck leaving the presidency and starting ISGO and the other platforms that will reach out to those who've had NDEs but have never talked about them, because that's really the first step and the most important of the common results that all of us who've had an NDE share, is that we are no longer afraid of death.
Right.
Because we know that we will never die, that leaving this world and these bodies is not the end. There are many who are frightened by it because they have no one to talk to.
Yes.
Can't tell you the number of Jews who have called me and said, I tried to talk to my rabbi or other rabbis about it, and none of them wanted to deal with it. They thought I was having a hallucination.
Correct, yeah.
And so my voice is not as a rabbi or a Jewish voice, though I use those terms. It is about what my soul has led me to be and do in this world. And so when I spoke to IANDS, I spoke in that manner. And I said, I haven't come to overturn or to change anything. I'm only telling you what it is this last NDE told me to do and what the centrality of IANDS could be in getting humanity to begin to give up its fear of death. And the result of that would be the dissolution of the power of evil, because it is the fear of death that drives us all into destructive behavior. Ultimately, it is that. And so by teaching other people, not philosophically or theologically, but out of the heart and soul of each of us who've gone and returned, that we're no longer afraid of death because there is no death.
Correct.
Is more powerful than a rabbi or a priest or a minister or the Pope standing up and saying, we don't die. There's no judgment, there's no heaven or hell. There's only the process of transformation and the cleansing of our souls so that we can move on to other levels of being. This is what the Malachim said. Shlomo, that was my name, which, by the way, was changed to Yahya because there is this old principle in Judaism that says if you change your name, the Malach HaMavis, the messenger of death, won't be able to find you.
Yes.
So before I went to India the second time, I talked to one of my great teachers, Reb Zalman Schachter, who changed my name to Yahya. So Yah is the imperative form, which is live.
Live, yes.
And Yah, of course, is God's name. So Yah, live for God. And so that's what I've been doing ever since that visit in 2007 when I went. And this last NDE in January of 18 told me it is now time for you to act. And I have been astounded at the response, not from IANDS per se, but from so many people, including the two of you, who have had the same message, but in different ways. So this last conference that was held this year was filled with people who all had the same message, one way or another. And it's been such joy because I've spoken already to many of them, one of whom I think you've spoken to already. And it's time to unburden ourselves with what we know. And IANDS is a platform where what our individual voices and experience say join together so that it comes as a chorus.
Yeah.
Like the sound of existence itself. We are, and like the two of you, are a choir. Like the choir around God's throne in Isaiah's image of God seated on the throne with the Malachim around him singing. And called the Sanctus in Christianity. Talk about it in a moment. Because these Malachim said, God does not sit in the distance of a throne, but God is present in all of us. We are all a vessel of God's intention. And that is where the fear goes away. It's not whether you're a Jew or a Catholic or any of the varieties of Christianity, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, renewal, anything, that the presence of the Holy One is there for all of us. And to turn to that means to give up the fear that drives us. And when I delivered the message, of course, it was pretty startling. And Chuck called me and said, boy, you really overturned things. And I said, well, it was not my intention. And he said, that's okay. They know it wasn't your intention. But there are those of us who wanted things to change because we were struggling with it. And now there are people like the two of you who are beginning to find ways in which IANDS can take this incredible body of knowledge and share it with the world. That includes scientists, physicists, doctors, who know about all of this from the science side, and who many of whom themselves have had NDEs, and the way it transformed them in their view of themselves and of their work. There are so many of us who just have been the experiencers of the NDEs and what they mean. And the other part of the message was for me to now take all that I have learned and developed in this world for teaching, for knowledge, for education, and for healing, and to disseminate it in videos, in books, on tapes, whatever you can do, so that when you leave here for the last time, you will leave everything that you know, and it can be a repository of wisdom to help people move ahead so that this world survives. Not the next world, but that this world survives and thrives, and we accept the gift of it and the knowledge that the well-being of humanity and the rest of the world is in each of our hands. So
yeah, thank you.
And that was the message I received. And it's been staggering what's happened as a result of my just saying that.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We are over time. So, but this has been extremely important for us, for Suzanne and I, and I think also for people who are involved with IANDS, to hear this and to carry on and to carry forward. But we still should continue this discussion in the next session about your 7th NDE, which was earlier this year. So I think, but for now we need to stop. So I thank you very much.
And I thank you. It has been such a privilege and such an honor, and I'm so grateful to begin to say all this so directly, that it has lightened the burden in my consciousness and in my heart. So whatever I face now in the next stage of my illnesses, I face with a sense of confidence and gratitude that whatever happens from now on, what I know will not be locked away in my grave.
Yes. Well, thank you. And we look forward to talking with you shortly.
Thank you. Shalom.
Shalom.